Chapter 3, Eventide.
Time had escaped Henge. Despite his best intentions, one thing after another had kept him in the village. Cramped together in the main body of his cart, Trader Josh had shown Edgar his stock of artifacts. Most were innocuous, but might still have been used as evidence against the family of traders on a charge of general disrespect of the law. A few, however, were strictly forbidden. Josh saw Edgar's eyes widen when he unwrapped the prize of his collection, a pristine circuit analyzer with a full set of leads and connectors. "You know about these, right? Seen one before?" Henge started to shake his head, but then glanced at Josh before nodding. "When I was a kid, before the final purge, my dad used to repair old broken-down devices. He had one a lot like this, showed me how to use it to see inside the machines, read their memories, map out their circuits. He used to be a what-you-call-it, a virtuoso with an analyzer. Ye gods, what I wouldn't give to know someone with those skills. Do you still have the analyzer?" Edgar shook his head despondently. "Never knew what happened to it. Went looking for it a while back. It was gone. My dad didn't leave anything like that just laying around. He kept it in a safe, hidden from the law keepers under the floorboards. When I finally got it open, the safe was empty except for a few antique gold coins." Josh shook his head. "That's such a shame. I tell you, Henge, it's a small movement so far, and it's still very precarious, but to the east they're starting to want to bring this stuff back. Say, you couldn't use my analyzer to bring old circuits back to life, could you?" Henge looked him straight in the eye. "Trader, I was just a boy. How much do you think I would have learned? How much would I recall after all this time? Besides, I saw what the preachers and the law keepers did to my dar. No one should have to die that way." Josh gave a disappointed nod. "Ah well, it was just a thought. Can't blame you for being careful. I better get these things stashed away, before prying eyes get me hauled away in chains. You know you can trust me to keep my mouth shut." Josh laughed. "Of course I do. The moment I saw your disgust at today's punishment I knew it. Besides, if you turned me in, I'll tell them I bought it from you." Josh winked. Henge stared at him then laughed. "Gan with you. I better get going." And yet more things delayed him. He was called over to give his advice on the village's methane generator. The mash in the concrete tank was sour and yielding an overabundance of dangerous sulfates. He advised them to fully drain the tank, ploughing the mash deep into a field that would lie fallow the following year. "Send a cart up tomorrow, and I'll give you a barrel of juice from my tank. It'll give Yorn a quick start. You'll be back to full production in no time." Henge made it as far as the base of the hill and the path that would lead him home before the preacher intercepted him again. The preacher was leading a line of villagers singing a song of gathering as they marched around the circumference of the village. "Come along, Henge. Come along." He rattled a coin box on the end of a handle under Edgar's nose. "A shilling and join us for prayers, or a crown and be on your heathen way." The preacher grinned as if this were the greatest good humour, but there was a hardness in his eyes. Henge stifled an urge to punch the preacher, and passed over a shilling before joining the line. He saw the verger marking his name in a book, and worked with the others under the verger's watchful eye. It was near the end of the marcher's route, a quarter-mile more, and they were in the abbey. The benches were hard, the sermon was long, and Edgar listened to not a single word of it. He stood when everyone else stood, sat when they sat, knelt when they knelt. In between, he studied the stonework of the nearest column, glanced at the arching vault of the ceiling, and admired the colours of the last of the day's light streaming in through the stained glass windows. The sky was deepest blue when he left the abbey, fading to star-spotted black in the east, and a riot of colours on the western horizon. Edgar pulled a lamp from his pack, poured in a small quantity of oil, and lit the wick. The lamp projected a puddle of light in front of him as he entered the darkness of the forest and started climbing to his home. The night was alive with sound, odd creaks and groans from the trees, the rustling of small animals through the undergrowth, and snuffles and calls of all kinds. Glowing eyes regarded the passing of the man with his small lamp fending off the darkness. On the edge of vision, Henge saw a small running figure, the lamp revealing for a moment the flapping of a red cloak. The spore poisons had faded from Edgar's body, no unnatural bloom of colour washed over, and around the skeletal trees. Out of habit, he followed his rote of rituals to determine whether he was seeing a phantasm. To the best of his knowledge, the figure flitting between the trees was real. He resolutely set his eyes to the path and muttered cold iron. "Stay on the path. Ain't no child of the forest gonna trouble ye." Home at last, Edgar took a taper and lit the fire laying ready in his grate from the flame of the lamp. He dropped his new coat and pack on the chair opposite his in front of the fire. He cut himself some meat from a hanging ham, some good hard cheese from a wheel in the pantry. One of the small loaves and a jug of ale from the cool stone chest completed his simple meal. He sat in silent thought, contemplating the flames of the fire and the events of the day while he chewed his food slowly and completely. At last he put down his plate, took a deep draught of his beer, and stood up from his chair. He reached into the fireplace, feeling for a hidden ledge behind the mantel. He pulled out a sack that had been secured there and sat back in his chair. Unwrapping the sack, metal gleamed in the reflected light of the flames. He caressed its smooth, implacable surface. He marvelled once again at the skill of the long-forgotten craftsman, who had carved a face of chilling beauty from a block of Cott's grey alloy. Henge turned it this way and that, looking for the deep copper-toned reflections within the silver metal. The blank eyes seemed to be watching him, judging him. He turned it over. This wasn't a mask, nor a full sculpture of a head. It was a face, complete from hairline to jawline. The back was flat, with indentations so artfully filled with a hard crystalline substance it seemed that the alloy itself was made transparent. "Well now, shining one, I think I saw your likeness today. Who were you? Friend or foe? Should I call you angel or demon? Michael or Lucifer? Can I restore you to life? Should I?" Edgar had woken during the night, the pounding of pre-dawn rain on the slate of his roof loud in his ears. He pushed back the covers and padded across the stone floor to his kitchen window. He pumped the handle to raise water from his well, letting the first sputterings of cloudy water spill into his china sink and flow away. When the water flowed cold and freely, he filled a mug and sipped from it while he looked out into the night. He had heard distant rumblings of thunder, so he waited a while. Soon a flash of lightning painted the storage sheds and tarpaulin-covered stacks in the space between his home and the base of the landfill dome. The lightning flickered for more than a second. Enough time for Edgar to pick out a hulking figure standing by the path leading to his excavation sites. Edgar froze, mug lifted to lips. Within a few seconds thunder crashed around him and the rain hit the ground with renewed vigour. He waited for another flash of lightning. He realised that his chest was aching and remembered to breathe, trying to keep his breath long and quiet while his heart hammered, and he heard the sough of blood pumping in his right ear. The yard lit up again, briefly this time. The figure was gone from the gap in his fence. The rain was frozen in the flash of light, bouncing 6 inches up from the sodden ground. Edgar looked around, trying to see the intruder. The darkness washed in, leaving a vivid after-image in his eyes. He began to believe that his eyes or the lingering effects of the spore had tricked him, shadows and shapes turning into an imagined person. The lightning came again. There, in the centre of the yard, was a tall, shambling creature walking upright and heading for the gate that led to the forest path with 2 or 3 sections of ceramic pipe hoisted over its shoulder. It was difficult to make out details in the heavy shadows and bright highlights of the lightning, but Edgar thought that it had long rain slate hair flowing down over enormous round-humped shoulders. It walked with a rolling gait and glanced towards him. The face was broad and flat, with round expressive eyes under a heavy brow. When the lightning came for what proved to be the final time, the creature was gone. Edgar saw with surprise that the gate was closed, though it was his habit to leave it open. He shivered in the chill air and returned to his warm bed. Edgar woke from a troubling dream to weak sunlight. On his shelf, a large ornamental clock showed that it was nearly 9 o'clock, nearly 2 hours after his usual waking time. He lay back and stared at the ceiling. He remembered laying awake for a long time after he returned to bed, new thoughts bringing him back from the edge of sleep every time he closed his eyes. He thought about the midnight visitor. Edgar had a sick, hollow feeling. It had occurred to him that this time the spore poison had taken his mind. He had had occasional, unexpected hallucinations days or weeks after exposure to the raw spore. They had been mild, a recurrence of the soft pastel light halos around everyday objects, sometimes a brief coloured snowfall. This was the first time he thought he might have manifested a phantasm more than a day after inhaling spore. He shook his head. There was another explanation. One that meant that he wasn't going quietly insane. The lore was full of cautionary tales of the not-quite people that lived in the gaps between the widest spaced villages. There were those who used the old names, giants, elves, pixies, and a horde of other mythical beasts. But most, including Edgar, considered them outcasts displaced during the Long War. Many folk had become isolated for decades. Everyone knew the hazards of breeding from a reduced genetic pool. That's why the law mandated that every child must leave the village on their 18th birthday and make their way to a new home. The allegation was supposed to be random, but everyone knew that Coin could secure a place in a favoured village. Edgar shook his head at the thought. He had read of the genetic mutations of the royal families of Europe, the prevalence of haemophilia, the Habsburg jure, the many princes and princesses across the centuries discreetly homed in asylums throughout the continent. And still, the rich chose to use their influence to put their children into areas of ever-decreasing genetic diversity. Edgar looked at his coarse, unlovely features in the mirror and laughed. What you smiling at, you old mutt? Go on, get up, you lazy toad. He paused, a distant memory coming back to him. It was whispered that not all the strangeness that had been observed in wild folk could be explained by inbreeding. And it was known that even large parties of determined hunters could find a few of their number disappeared one by one, the bodies, if found, completely unmarked. He remembered something that his grandfather had said to him before his father had called Edgar away to do his chores. His grandfather had leaned down to where the young Edgar had been drawing pictures of men fighting elves, and said they were human folk once. During the war they was turned, twisted into something else. You keep your distance. You carry cold iron, but you keep your eyes down on the path, and you just keep working. Hear me? Promise.